So today we're going to look at the Bill of Rights and talk about the Bill of Rights. Let me apologize right now that I'm in, I have these tools around and everything like that. I'm in my garage at home right now. The rest of my family's asleep and I don't want to wake them up by doing this video, but I need to talk to you quickly and show you, in about 10 minutes or so, talk to you about the Bill of Rights and give you some hand signals. So that's why instead of there being a PowerPoint on the screen right now, it's actually me. So lucky you get to see me here. So we're going to talk about the 10 Amendments. I'm going to give you some hand signals to help you remember the 10 Amendments and what each of them stand for. Most of them I feel like I got pretty good hand signals to help you remember. A couple of them it's a little harder to see the connection, but we're going to give it a try. So first 10 Amendments. The 10 Amendments are there. It's also called the Bill of Rights, and they're there to protect your rights. So if somebody were to come at you, like they wanted to do something to harm you, you might push them away. Okay, well, you push them away with your hands. You got these your 10 fingers. That's protecting you. Okay, so you push people away. So you push the government away. If the 10 Amendments, they protect you from the government abusing your rights or from anybody else abusing your rights. But mostly we worry about the government taking those rights away. So these things prevent the government from passing laws and doing things that would infringe upon your rights. So that's what the amendments do. That's what the Bill of Rights is there for, is to protect you and your rights. All right, so that's the first thing. 10 fingers up, that's the 10 Amendments to protect you. First one, okay, First Amendment, there's 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. And we're going to remember that with RAPS, R-A-P-P-S, RAPS. So freedom of religion, so we point up to God. Freedom of assembly, like come here, everybody come here, we're going to have a meeting. That's what the freedom of assembly. You have the freedom to gather together with other people and have meetings and talk about things. There's nothing wrong with that. In some countries there are. Countries today, you have to get like permission to gather together with groups, larger groups, and depending upon the country and where you are, the number of people you can gather together in one place without permission from the government is restricted. All right, so freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. Okay, it's kind of like, you're going to do this. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so you're kind of like pointing and saying this needs to change. So you have the right to petition your government to make change, to tell them they're doing something wrong, that you don't like the way things are going. Then you have the freedom of press. Okay, like you're a journalist, you're writing notes to write an article. There's the freedom of the press. And then the freedom of speech. Okay, so First Amendment, there's 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. Freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, freedom of press, and freedom of speech. All right, First Amendment, then we go to the Second Amendment. Second Amendment, bang, bang, it's like a gun. You have the right to bear arms. Now, before I go on, I just thought of this. A lot of these hand signals, I got these from Keith Hughes. He's also known as Hip Hughes. He's a history teacher up in the New York area, and he came up with a lot of these. A couple of the others, one of them I got from one of my students, others I've gotten from a few other spots, other YouTube videos and things like that. So don't want to give credit to the people that came up with some of these hand signals for these 10 Amendments. All right, so First Amendment we got, Second Amendment we've got, then we've got the Third Amendment. Okay, you can see these 3 fingers, that's the Third Amendment. Okay, well the Third Amendment, that's about the size of a quarter. Okay, so the Third Amendment, remember this Quartering Act. The Quartering Act was during the Revolution. People didn't like that. Hey, you can't live in my house, that kind of stuff. Well, the Quartering Act, the Third Amendment says you have the right not to quarter soldiers. So here's these 3 soldiers want to come into your house. Well, that's the quarter. You have the right to not quarter soldiers. Doesn't really come up a lot these days. Fourth Amendment, you have the right from protection from unreasonable search and seizure. So how do we remember that? Fourth Amendment. Well, the Fourth Amendment, you curl up, knuckles, knock knock, who's there? It's the police, let us in. Do you have a warrant? No, then I'm not letting you in. Okay? You have the right, you have protection from unreasonable search and seizure. If they don't have a good reason, they don't have a warrant, you don't have to let them in. Okay? So, that's the Fourth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment. This is the rights of the accused. That's what the Fifth Amendment is. Well, how do we remember that? Well, one of the rights of the accused is the right to remain silent. Okay? You have the right to remain silent. This includes things like double jeopardy. In other words, you cannot be tried for the same crime over and over. So like, oh, you were innocent the first time. Well, we're just going to pull them before a court, another jury, See if they'll say he's guilty, and just keep pulling them before courts until we get the verdict that we want. You cannot do that. You have also what's called the right of due process, and basically due process says that if we're gonna have a severe punishment for you, and the more severe the punishment, the more process that you are due. So the more careful we have to be to make sure you're getting the chance to adequately defend yourself. So if it's a life and death kind of case where you could get the death penalty, well, there's a lot of due process that person gets, because the punishment is very severe. Okay, if you're going to be put in prison for a long period of time, you get more due process than if the crime is not even than other situations. Okay, and so you have the rights to due process. And so the Fifth Amendment, you have the rights of the accused, like your right to remain silent. Okay, Sixth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment is the right to a speedy and fair trial. So how do we remember that? Sixth Amendment. Okay, I just put my hand down. That's all. Tapping on my watch. Okay, a speedy trial. So most people don't wear watches these days. You just look at your cell phone. But used to, people wore wrist watches all the time. And so you'd say, "Hey, hurry up! We got to go. Got to go." Okay, you have the right to a speedy trial. We can't keep people. We can't arrest somebody and then just keep them in jail and say, "Yeah, we're going to have a court hearing for you in 5 years." No, you have to have a speedy trial. Now, notice speedy is not defined, and unfortunately, in our society today, sometimes it does take longer than it probably should. Now, in those cases, people usually get to go home. They're not kept in jail for a long time if the trial date is far off in the future. Of course, unless it's determined that they're too dangerous a person to let out. But even then, sometimes they're not always kept in jail throughout the course while they're waiting for their trial. Now, one of the things that actually slows trials down often is the defendant will actually request more time to get their defense in order. And so one of the things that actually slows trials down many times today is making sure we're giving the defense enough time to defend themselves. So that goes back to the idea that they have due process. All right, so you have the right to a speedy and fair trial. And so that part of what makes it a fair trial is a jury. If that's what we're talking about in criminal cases. We'll talk about jury trial also in the Seventh Amendment. Okay, so you have the right to a fair trial, a speedy and fair trial is the Sixth Amendment. Well, in the Seventh Amendment, you have the right to a trial by jury, and this is in civil cases. So here's you, here's the judge, here's the jury. So right to a trial by jury in civil cases. You, the judge, and the jury. That's the Seventh Amendment. Okay. So the Eighth Amendment. This one I like a lot just because it's a little weird, but weird or kind of a little off is usually easier to remember. Helps you to remember something. So the reason I like it though is because it was a former student that came up with it. And so the Eighth Amendment. Notice it's 4 on each side. I'm doing that on purpose. So the Eighth Amendment is the right to no cruel and unusual punishment. Okay, so no cruel and unusual punishment. Well, scratching somebody's eyes out would be a cruel and unusual punishment, and so that's what I do to remember that the Eighth Amendment is no cruel and unusual punishment, scratching the eyes out. All right, so cruel and unusual punishment. That kind of can change over time as society changes. What we determine and believe to be cruel and unusual changes over time. At one time. There was all sorts of ways that people were punished for crimes, and as society has changed and as we have changed what we think is proper, the punishments have changed as well. And so one of the big issues today with cruel and unusual punishment is like solitary confinement. As we better and better understand humans and the psychology of the brain and how the brain works, one of the things we see is that humans are social creatures, and we need interaction with other people, and we need human touch and things of that nature. And so solitary confinement, where we put a person in a cell, a small cell by themselves for like 23 hours a day, 23 and a half hours a day, and they have virtually no contact with other people for weeks and weeks and days, weeks and weeks, perhaps months and months. People that are involved in our prison system are really starting to say and look at this and say, hey, this should probably be considered cruel and unusual punishment. And so that's one of those issues that's kind of in the criminal justice system today, being closely looked at, talked about. And if you think that's an important issue, we should get involved. Citizens should be getting involved in their government. Maybe you should talk to your congressman about that. And so these are the kinds of things that, this is why these amendments are important, because these amendments, day after day, these come up. These are important issues that come up all the time. In the newspapers and in the news, you see these different issues coming up. And so for that, I just gave you one example. The Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment, is part of the discussion that we have today on how to properly confine people and what prisons should be like. All right, so then we get the Ninth Amendment. So the Ninth Amendment, we've got 9 fingers up, we've got one missing, one that's left out. Well, that one that's left out kind of stands for, okay, we've got all these rights that we've talked about, but just because we have left some, just because we haven't said anything about these others, doesn't mean they're not your right. So in other words, you have other rights that aren't on this list. Just because we made a list doesn't mean these are the only rights you have. You may have others. You likely do have others. We don't want you to think this is all you have. Your rights, this was really the deal with the founding generation. They did not think, okay, your rights come from the government, okay? Your rights, you are born with them. They're natural rights, okay? And so simply because the government is saying, here's a list of your rights, the government is not saying, these are the rights that we're giving you. You have all the rights that you've ever had. We're just acknowledging these, and we're being very extra careful to safeguard and protect these rights. You may have other rights as well, and you certainly do have other rights as well. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be protected by your government. All right, so not all rights are listed in the Constitution. And then we get to the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, so the 10th Amendment, I don't have a really good hand signal for it. Basically, you've got all these rights, and it's full now. Okay, we've listed all these rights, all these powers in the Constitution, everything like that. It's all filled up. That's all the government can do. That's the best I can come up with. So powers that are not delegated to the government, they're not in the Constitution, aren't said, here's your power, and it's not forbidden for the state to do it, well then it's reserved for the state. So in other words, here's all that you can do. Everything we've just said in the Constitution before this, that's all you get to do, federal government. Everything else is left for the states to do that. These are the things you can do. So everything else is what you can, everything we've just talked about, that's what you can do. Everything else is reserved for the states. These are the rights of the states. All right, so let's go through these one last time real quick. Everybody should get your hands up, and we're going to do these together, okay? I'm watching you. You don't think I can see you, but I really can. Okay? So, 10 amendments, they protect you. These 10 amendments, they protect your rights from government abuse or any other entity abusing your rights. Okay? The First Amendment, there's 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. They are, there's religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, no quartering soldiers. You have the right not to quarter soldiers. Fourth Amendment, knock knock, it's the police. You can't come in unless you have a warrant. Right to not be searched, unlawful search and seizure. Fifth Amendment, the rights of the accused. You have the right to remain silent. Sixth Amendment, you have the right to a speedy and fair trial. Seventh Amendment, this is you, this is the judge, here's the jury. You have a right to a trial by jury. This is in civil cases. Eighth Amendment, you have no cruel and unusual punishment. You can't scratch out the eyes. Ninth Amendment, we didn't list all of your rights. There's other rights that you have. Okay, that's like this one over here, the one not on the list. Okay, there's other rights. 10th Amendment, all the powers. We've already talked about all these other powers that you have, federal government. Everything else is reserved for the states. They've got all the other powers. So that's the first 10 amendments.